Yeah, hi, Eduardo. Thank you very much for having me here. It's quite exciting. It's quite a great journey. This is my second year as a judge on the DLA game game gaming stream. It's always a pleasure to kind of like discover like new creators within the continent. This is a space that I've been in quite a number of years now. So great to kind of like give feedback and see kind of like really interesting creative stuff that people are coming up with. So just a little bit of background about myself. So my background actually was originally in economics and finance. And before I started set up Maliyo Games back in 2012. And this is kind of like a long-term journey for me. Mostly because I kind of like see the need to kind of like create African-inspired stories and make that part of the kind of like global content of users across the world. So Maliyo is really set up to kind of like fill that gap for African-inspired, or bringing African narrative and African-inspired content onto like the mobile devices through gaming. We've built quite a lot of games over the period of time that we've been around. So we have over 40 games within our portfolio. We sort of like done multiple distribution rounds, done several sort of like licensing partnerships, and we continue to develop games both internally and for third parties through the studio. We're currently a team of 10, so quite nice and small. We're mostly all based in Lagos in Nigeria, but most of the team is actually from Nigeria. We are growing the team quite aggressively. We're currently working on a racing game called Damn4 Racer. It's a 3D car racing game around the sort of like Lagos scene, with sort of like key landmarks from the city of Lagos. And our last title was a board game of the classic Whot game called Whot King. It's available on both Android and iOS. So you guys can check it out. But let's talk a little bit about the gaming industry. The gaming industry is quite big. It's quite huge, and a lot of people don't understand how the segment works, which is the reason why it hasn't been fully developed mostly within sub-Saharan Africa, if you exclude South Africa from it. So this is kind of like, I don't want to call it a problem. This is an opportunity we're trying to tap into. Mobile is obviously driving a lot of the growth within gaming. You can see that gaming is broken down to both console, PC, and mobile. North America and China are the most dominant markets, so they are the most lucrative market, and they represent something like between the two of them around 70% of the global revenues that you're seeing on this chart. The hyper casual and the casual space is pretty much where we play at as well, but this is also the segment that has the largest density of creators. Long-term plans kind of like to evolve away from this segment and to maybe start developing more serious games and also some mid-core games as well. But this is something that's going to happen over time because of kind of like the talent development that is required to be able to play within that space. You're seeing a lot of like social and competitive gaming, driving user engagement. So like multiplayer, real-time multiplayer, live ops, within game, social apps that have gaming integrated within them or gamification integrated within them. So that's kind of like where the buzz is right now, but there's also significant opportunities for cloud gaming, VR and AR. I saw some of the winners within those categories. These are sort of what you would call emerging segments. They have been emerging for quite a number of years now, but still like huge opportunities, especially within VR and AR. Really huge opportunities for content creators in that space to kind of like do something really new and really exciting. And I still feel like Africa still remains significantly untapped when it comes to the market for gaming, both from a distribution and from a monetization standpoint. And that is partly because you don't have a lot of like local content creators in that space. This is obviously something that I think would change over the next sort of like 2 to 3 years, as we're seeing a little bit more investment within the space. With obviously programs like DLA. supporting content creators in this segment. So hopefully we'll see some of the winners go on to kind of like create amazing content and really inspire people within the communities to kind of like go ahead to follow in their footsteps. But my talk really is about sort of like, I wanted to share some of my thoughts around what I think is needed within the space to kind of like build this kind of like transformation that is required. And this is kind of like from my experience in the past, and I'm sharing this with the winners, so that hopefully you guys can look internally at how you tackle each of these. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but certainly the list that I think is very very paramount for some of you if you're looking at building this long term and looking at building businesses around this. So the first one is really around the vision and leadership, and this is more like about the individual who's driving that sort of like transformation. This is really important because everyone sort of like looks to you for direction in terms of where to go, when to go, how to go. And this is something that you need to be certain about. You need to have a very clear vision. That could be obviously through some kind of like documentation that helps you communicate what the product is, what the product roadmap is, who the target audience for that product is, and how you are going to deliver on that product, either as an individual or as a collective. This is something that actually came across very strongly in some of the individuals that that were selected as winners within the gaming category. We obviously reviewed a lot of the presentations and documentations and pictures that you guys put together, and saw some really strong characters and personalities come through, either through the initial submissions that you put in or through the one-on-one interviews that you were able to do. So, this is obviously great credit to you, and that you do have that. But this is something that I think that you should continue to invest in to ensure that at every single turn you are clear about that vision. And this could also, mean putting together a vision and a mission statement, so that if you ever get lost, you can always look back to sort of what that vision was and go back to kind of like, like square one and start to build again, with that clarity around the vision that you have. And with leadership, about bringing people on your side, whether your team members, your partners, or the stakeholders that are invested in the company. DLA obviously is a good example of that. And ensuring that you are demonstrating good leadership. Like, you're not waiting for people to tell you when to, you are telling them what your plan is. And then obviously, going on to actually act upon that plan. The other thing that I think, or one of the other things that I think is going to be a big challenge as you start to scale up is on the talent side. Obviously, these are kind of like emerging industries. They're relatively new spaces. What that means is that eventually you would run out of, like easy access to competent talent. This is a challenge that we faced very early on in the development of Maliyo. And we faced this challenge for a very long time until we sort of like decided to make the talent challenge part of our business model. And what we did in that was to kind of like invest in an in-house training program to enable us to identify and develop people internally, rather than waiting for the market to kind of like provide us with like ready talents. We also embedded this within our sort of like hiring process, where we've kind of like put together very strong sort of like pipeline mechanisms for identifying, assessing, and then sort of like recruiting talent, so that again, it's not too painful a process as we start to move from maybe like 5 individuals to 10 individuals, and move from 10 to 20 and maybe 20 to 50. That we have a system in place to be able to kind of like attract and grow talent. So this is something that you also need to think about. It might be very early in your development process, but again, it's something that you have to keep at the back of your mind and start to figure out solutions to that talent problem. Because if you're speaking to potential partners or investors, or if the scale of your project is one that requires 5 or 10 individuals to be able to work on it, you will come across this challenge, and I think it's something that you need to kind of like have at the back of your mind as you start to grow. The next one that I have here is around execution. The idea is kind of like the easy step. Like I know you've put in a lot of work to come up with the concepts and the kind of like project that you're working on, and a lot of you have invested an incredible amount of time developing this project so far to this point. But what you will then start to find is that delivering on the project becomes a little bit more complicated as you go through time, and as you start to work with multiple stakeholders, people can be pulling the project in multiple directions, and it's kind of like very difficult to keep a sense as to where the project at any one time. Now, obviously, there are tools that makes it easier for you to kind of like build, fantastic communication, be it using Discord or using a tool like Slack. I'm sure most of you are using one of those tools, if not both of them. You have like project management tools that you can use. You have whiteboarding tools. I mean, there are loads of like sort of like collaborative or collaboration tools out there that would really help to make your work easy or easier. But the important thing here is to kind of like keep that sort of like project milestones in mind and be clear about when you're missing the key milestones, because it's very easy to get lost in the middle of a project. Actually delivering on this project is the important milestone that you have to kind of like focus on. And with the DLA support, like there is the expectation that you will get support for the project, but it's really up to you or down to you to ensure that you are actually able to execute the project and achieve what your initial objective was, which is delivering on a project that you can actually bring users on board and hopefully scale further down the line. One of the big challenges in my experience working within the gaming space has really been around distribution. And finding sort of like distribution mechanisms that work for target customers within the African continent. Now, obviously, one of the ways that you can distribute is to work with a publisher. So if that is the strategy that you have in mind, then this is a conversation that you want to start really early. And when you're building that relationship, try and build a relationship that actually meets with your own core objective, right? So it's very important that whatever partner you choose to work with, if you're looking at working with a publisher, for instance, that they sort of like embody the ethos of you as an organization or you as an individual, and that you guys actually have a very good working relationship. Because sometimes when there's a misalignment in objectives or misalignment in expectations, that can lead to disappointment, and that can also lead to failed executions. And this is an important step when you're looking at working with third-party distributors or publishers, that you find somebody who really believes in the vision the same way that you do and is willing to make as much investment in the delivery of that project, not just in the distribution of the project in itself. If you're self-distributing, then you really need to start looking at, how you're going to do that. So, in our case, we are a mobile-based platform, so we are looking at the app stores with Google Play, and building relationships with product managers within those two platforms to ensure that we have top-line visibility for our games when they're published. There is a timing component to when you start having those conversations, when you have a prototype, when you have a pitch deck for your game. It's very important that you start kind of like having those early conversations and obviously having very clear timelines for your project in terms of when you want to get it delivered. Obviously, distributing your content is one thing. Generating revenue from your games is another thing. Within our line of business, we operate a free-to-play model, which essentially means that the games are accessed for free, and then we try and monetize the games through in-app advertising or through in-app purchases, and in some cases through subscriptions. And it also, in some cases, is a combination of all. But I really want to recommend that you guys start thinking about alternative revenue streams for your games, thinking about long-term IPs, for instance, and how you can do cross-platform promotions or cross-platform distributions for your game. So if you have a game, you could want to create an animation from the game. If you have an animation, you might want to create a game from the animation, and stuff like that to kind of like drive in revenues. You should also invest heavily in sort of like building up the IP, because that IP would have sort of like long-term value, beyond just the reach of like, players on the App Store, for instance. So this is a very strong recommendation that you also start thinking about revenue models for your game really early, because there will be a lot of like investment in capital, investment in sweat equity, investment in time, and you need to ensure that you have some kind of like return on that investment in the cash form, and this is very important. And the last bit that I think is going to be very important for you guys is investment. So financial investment or capital investment, as well as advisory. And I put in the advisory piece there because sometimes it's very difficult to raise equity investment or to raise capital investment for projects. And another way that you can approach this is to get people who have a lot of experience to invest their time in advising you on your project. This is extremely valuable because it can open a lot of doors for you. And those doors essentially, in some cases, can be converted into revenue. So I think like, don't wait to get investment to be able to reach out to people and ask them if they're willing to kind of like sit in some kind of like non-advisory capacity and give you based on experience. And there are multiple individuals that you can reach out to. It's a very good platform for reaching out to people. Build a relationship with them first, and then see again if there is a fit in terms of ethos, vision, passion, interest, before you actually make that request for them on your advisory board, and leverage them to unlock investment or leverage them to unlock access to capital, as there might be alternative methods that you can access. And there's a last one which I haven't included in this list, which is around sort of like partnerships. There are loads of like funds that are available for creators like yourselves. There are loads of access to kind of like capital grants and stuff like that you can apply for. I would definitely recommend that you also start looking into those really early. The more resources you can get access to at this stage, the better, and the greater the likelihood that you can actually deliver on your project and be able to achieve success. But that's my presentation. Thank you very much for having me again, and I look forward to seeing you guys deliver on your projects. Thank you, Eduardo.
Thanks so much.